One thing I know about myself in collecting armies is I don't tend to go for the vehicles. I really like painting the little guys, but I don't really enjoy painting vehicles as much, and so I don't tend to have them in my armies, and that leads to me losing a lot of games. But you know what? As of 10th edition, I am a Tyranid player, and I'm not letting the cycle continue. I got a big bug. It took me forever to buy my first vehicle for one of my 40k armies. I remember it was an orc truck that I later sold to Nick. There's just something about vehicles, a big brick of a model that takes forever to build and paint, and at the end of the day, it's still only one model. Infantry with a head, shoulders, knees, and toes have a personality, but a brick, or in this case, a termagant the size of a grapefruit, it's a very different experience. I got my model assembled, and another thing with big models, small little things like gaps and mold lines become more apparent. Around the smokestacks, there was a little gap on each tube. To fix this, I used Tamiya basic putty. This stuff is thinned down with plastic glue, so I rubbed on some plastic glue and then smeared on a thin layer of the putty, trying to keep it as smooth as possible so I don't have to sand it so much once it's dry. There was a big old gap where the two halves of his tail met. One thing that really didn't work for me was a huge gap around his neck. I broke out the milliput, made myself a little snake, and squished it into the gap, using a toothpick and my sculpting tools to blend his neck into his neck hole. Now, there's no gap. I wonder if he's like a turtle and his neck can come out really far to bite things. Another sticking point for me was where the two halves of each smokestack meet. There's a seam that doesn't look very natural. I made up a slurry of my Tamiya putty and then layered this into each hole, which filled in the cracks. Now I've got my T-Fex built, it's time to tackle that base. I don't know how Games Workshop decides which vehicles go on bases and which don't, but the Tyranofex gets one, and it's the dreaded 120 by 92mm base. These are tricky because there's a lot of ground to cover, and to cover mine, I tore up some chunky cork, gluing it down in vertical stacks along the edge, and then I took some thin cork and made a ring around the rest of the base. To see where my bug's feet are gonna go, I took a few drops of paint and put one on each hoof and then squished them down into the cork, leaving me with perfect impressions. I glued and drilled some holes for pins on these spots, adding some more super glue beneath the base for added strength, and then I drilled into the feet of the bug. Now he'll be perfectly placed, and I know what spots on the base to leave untextured. I added more and more little pieces of cork and then made up some milliput to smooth the transitions. I tore a wet piece of cork and pressed it into the wet putty to leave the impression of rock texture. And then I grabbed some stuff, some sand and coconut husk that I have sifted into fine and coarse ground scatter. I smeared wood glue all over the base, letting some of the natural cork show through, and then sprinkled on a mixture of my different supplies. Then I put my boy back on the base so I could see where I need to aim to put some epic basing plants around so that I won't block them later, and the base was finished. After a long day of hobbying, I have one model to show for it. Now I've just about got my Tyranofex all built up. The only thing left is thinking about magnetization. This guy's got 3 different weapon options, and do I want them all? Maybe not. The acid spray is a very interesting weapon. It deletes space marines, but a lot of my Tyranid army can kill space marines, so I don't think I need the acid spray. The fleshborer hive, I think, is the best looking of the weapon options. I love the weird barnacle beehive that's going on, and it's just fun that it's not a gun. Like Tyranid with guns, I like it, but sometimes it is just a gun. These weapons are very, very alien. But I don't think I need to magnetize because I think I know what weapon I'm gonna go with, and that is the Rupture Cannon. The Rupture Cannon is an incredibly powerful gun. It has heavy, so if he stands still, he gets +1 to his shooting, and so that would be 2 shots, hitting on 2s, strength 18. So it's wound and toughness 9 on 2-ups and everything else basically in the game on 3-ups. Then it's AP -4 and damage D6 +6, which is lovely. It used to be 2d6, and that roll was, you would really sweat that roll because sometimes you would do 12 damage, but it felt like a lot more often you would do 2 or 3 damage. So D6 +6 is a very, very welcome change. This guy is going to be my Tyranid tank, and I want him to have a big, powerful battle cannon. And speaking of big and powerful, this guy has one of the most generous tank rules in all of 40k. Resilient Organism. Once per game, when an attack is allocated to the Tyranofex, I can change the damage profile of that attack to 0, which is really nice. Only once per game, but it is super nice because a lot of anti-tank weapons are designed to just, in a couple of dice, pierce through a tank and blow it up. So now that attack that goes through and my opponent says, I deal 9 damage to you, I can just say, no. Only get to do it once, but it's really, really fun. And to show that on the model, I might be using some magnets after all. To make my token, I looked at the instructions. This kit comes with a few little friends that no one ever glues on, but maybe one of these friends will make the perfect token. Also Games Workshop these poison sacks. You knew what you were doing. I took my grub and found where he sits on the thigh of the Tyranofex and then went for my magnets. I always like to use the biggest magnet I can. These 4mm by 3mm should do the trick. I drilled a hole into his leg and then sunk my magnet. But I don't want to just have a big hole in his leg. I set the magnet a little low in the hole and then rebuilt the surface with more Tamiya putty, making it look like it was never there. Then I drilled into my little fella and sunk the same size magnet, letting this one be a little bit proud. Now it jumps on like a parasite. Oh yeah, that is a magnet connection. And now there will never be any confusion. If I've used my once per game ability, I can just pop this little sucker off. Ooh, or maybe I'll put it back on sometimes and cheat. If I'm playing against Sean, maybe I'll cheat. But now that I've got everything ready, it is time to paint. And usually, I don't like painting vehicles. I really like dudes. Like, I really like painting just an individual model. There is nothing on this sucker I can't finish in like 5 to 10 minutes. And that's what makes painting really fun. Just moving from thing to thing to thing. But on a big old vehicle or a big old tank or even a big old bug, sometimes processes can drag on, but I think I got some strategies. I think I got some ideas of how I can make the process a little more enjoyable. Because he's so big, I don't want to glue everything together until he's done. Not even to make it easier to reach everything, but just to make it easier to hold everything. I put poster putty into all these seams to keep the paint out of these spots. Then I prime my big bug in black. I could have used a rattle can for this. He's really big and I'll use up a lot of my nice airbrush primer, but I don't really want to get up. I thinned down a red paint with black to darken it and then sprayed this on from underneath. Then I sprayed a bright red from above. The T-Fex has such nice texture, the airbrush did a lot of work, and to highlight this texture even more, I gave all the skin a wash with Karabog Crimson. Now I need to make some decisions. What do I really want to try on, and what do I want to just get done? For me, the skin is a try-on. I used a red paint to highlight his bony ridges, and then mixed in some yellow and did some smaller highlights on top of what I did. And then some orange highlights only on the bony ridges. One thing that helped with this was working in little sections. This process is tedious, but doing it little by little helped. First the right belly, then the right half of his face, then the left side of his face, then the left belly, then the left side of the tail, and the right side of the tail. This way every bit was manageable and I can keep the quality up. On his face, I painted his teeth with a few layers of brown and tan, making smaller and smaller lines until it was pure white. Doing these in lines makes his teeth look even sharper. Then to punch up the red a little more, I put tiny drops of yellow on the sharpest details of his skin. I got the flesh on the body of my Tyrannofex 100% done, and it's really important that it's 100% done. When I paint a vehicle, I tend to get really bored. It just takes a long time, and the model's not done, and the model's not done, and the model's not done, and I gotta paint the red, and I gotta paint the blue, and I gotta paint the bone. It just gets really tedious. But getting something done to completion, like his face, I really like how his face turned out. I enjoyed painting that face, and that face is gonna keep me company while I start knocking out some more parts of this guy. I knocked out the legs the same way I did the body. The legs aren't as textured, so I used the airbrush a lot more to lay down my highlights, focusing my paint job on the knuckles and joints. Then for his rupture cannon, for my high fleet behemoth's guns, I usually do bone, but I want the Tyrannofex's battle cannon to be special, so I went with purple. Carefully base coating the goopy parts of his gun around his red fingers, mixing some white paint into the purple to brighten it, and did some layering. I put this color halfway down the barrels, then used my airbrush to make a gradient down to dark purple. Then I put a purple wash over to blend my color transitions and darken the recesses. Then I went back to my red paint to give his gun balls some love. I mixed yellow into my red to make an orange and did a few gradients on these balls all the way up to white paint. I don't know what the rupture cannon shoots, but it's probably gross. I used my dry brush to highlight the dark purple parts of his cannon and painted the gun's mouth using my red and white paint to get it properly fleshy. On his gun's sack, I used my airbrush to make a transition from the red skin onto the purple sack, and I put a wash over this to shade the wrinkly details. With the gun done, I've got most of my favorite parts picked out, and now it's time for the just get it done parts, the blue carapace. About half the model is blue, and I just want to get it done efficiently. I base coated everything with a dark navy, and then loaded up a chunk of sponge and started sponging on a light blue. Then I did another round with a brighter blue, and a dry brushing of blue to catch on all the edges. I did another round of dry brushing with a light blue and did a sponging of this too, all over to give the armor some texture. And then the blue was done. It took no time and looks fine. Which means I have plenty of energy left for the Stinger salvos. I think red spikes poking out of the blue will look striking. I base coated these dark red and then layered them up to orange, giving them a red wash to bring it all together. Now for more fun details, his melee weapon, his horns. I used the airbrush to make a gradient from his blue and red skin to his bone armor. I used some contrast paint skeleton horde to tint the bone and make it look a little bit more lively, and then I dry brushed the tip with white. For all of his various spines, this guy is so pointy it's crazy he only does 4 attacks in melee, I base coated these with the dark tan and then layered the paint up to white using the same contrast paint to tint these into a natural looking horns and claws. For his tongue, I already like how the red is looking, so I glazed on some pink to change the color just a little bit. I'm really excited to have my Tyrannofex done. Almost as excited as I am to tell you about our Patreon. Ever wanted to fight your battles in the labyrinthine hallways of a starship, moving your models in tight formation through a maze of corridors, bulkheads, and junctions where retreat is impossible and danger is around every corner? Well, the Eons of Battle Starship Interior is here to make your dream a reality. For the month of July, subscribers to our Patreon will receive the Starship Interior, a set of claustrophobic, dynamic, and modular hallways that are scaled to perfectly suit wargaming miniatures and give you a new way to play. Working section by section, I actually found the painting process pretty enjoyable. I spent a ton of time on the stuff I really cared about, like all of the little claws and teeth and his gigantic gun, and I kind of sped through his carapace, like his blue armor just with a little bit of sponging and dry brushing. But I don't mind, because I'm always gonna be focusing on that big old gun and not really paying a lot of attention to his blue armor. Now, the tank is painted, but unfortunately this is not an Imperial Guard tank. And basically everything except the Imperial Guard, including Space Marines for some reason, tanks have bases. So the last step is gonna be taking care of this guy's base. I zenithalled my base with white paint from above. This catches on all the little fibers and sand grains beautifully. Then I sprayed brown paint over the earth and a dusting of dark green paint randomly over the jungle floor. I mixed in some extra black to make the middle of the base darker, and then I hit the epic basing bits with some neon green, which I also dusted over the rest of the base. Now all that's left is to assemble my boy. I loaded up his feetsies with super glue and squished him down. Then I glued on his little arms that looked too small to hold up his massive body. But I guess these are just limbs for lining up his cannon shots. Once he was all assembled, I gave him a coat of satin varnish. There's no picking this guy up by the base, he's too big, so I want the paint nice and protected. And I left a hole in the middle of his base for a reason. I squirted a generous dollop of UV cure resin, then I gave this pool a few blasts with my UV lamp to cure it. I did 3 sessions of 3 minutes so that the resin didn't get too hot and warp the base. And we can't forget about the little token. The Tyrannifex is 100% done. Varnished, based, ready to rock and roll on the tabletop. And I was saying that I don't like to paint vehicles because they kind of take too long. In the immortal words of Gimli, that only counts as one. I have a spreadsheet of all the models that I paint, and it's really fun after the end of a week to put like, I painted 10 guys, I painted 20 guys. This is just one dude, but he only took about a day to paint, a little bit more than a day, and that's good. I actually have 2 of these suckers. I think for my Tyranid army, I'm gonna go a few big bugs and lots and lots and lots of little bugs. But now that I've got the Tyrannifex done, I have 1 more vehicle under my belt, and I actually have tons and tons of other vehicles. I have a giant box of Space Marine vehicles. For my entire Warhammer career, I've been painting almost nothing but dudes, so to properly play Warhammer 40k 10th edition, I'm gonna have to paint a lot more tanks. Let me know in the comments below, what tank are you working on? Do you like painting tanks? I know a lot of people like painting tanks because it's a little bit more of like the scale model side of the hobby, and the little dudes are a little bit more of like the painterly figure painter side of the hobby, but I'm slowly working my way into vehicles. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.